place, so check this. This is the hard knock life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share their interests together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments and the lectures, fanboys, professional artists and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the N.O.C. In full color, you see me. The hard knock life, comics, movies and TV, yeah. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this.
And we're back. It's episode 3 of A Hard Knock Life, coming to you during Star Trek week. We started back on Monday. It was the 47th anniversary of the Star Trek franchise. Also, it's the week that Star Trek Into Darkness comes out on Blu-ray, so we decided, why not? We're all Trekkies. Let's spend an entire week writing about all things Trek. And that's what we did. So thank you, all of you, for reading all of the posts that we've had from Monday through Friday. We've been writing about Cisco. We've been writing about race and Star Trek, why I hate the Star Trek Into Darkness Blu-ray, why Jenn loves the Star Trek Into Darkness movie. She won't be here tonight to defend herself. We'll probably be ripping into it. We'll start off with a newbie to the broadcast. He is a writer and teacher who lives in Oakland, California. He's been a nerd of color his entire life, and he wrote one of the best pieces about coming to Star Trek that I've ever read. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Shawn Taylor. It's not quite 24th century technology, but it'll do. How you doing, Shawn?
I'm well. How are you?
Just thank you for being on Hard Knock Life. Thank you for your post on how you came to Star Trek. Before we get started and read everybody else, do you have a favorite Star Trek episode or moment that you'd want to share with the folks watching at home?
I think my favorite all-time episode is probably a TNG episode, The Drumhead.
Ooh.
I think it's probably my favorite episode of all time.
Interesting, and I know that it gets mentioned in some of the posts that came up on Star Trek Week this week. So maybe we can get into it a little bit tonight. So thank you for being on the show, Shawn.
Thanks for having me.
Out in Bakersfield, California. He'll be guest hosting in a couple weeks, so I'm gonna stay tuned for that. He's a writer, founder of the Rice Daddies blog. You can find him on Twitter at @dad_strangeland. He also had a few great posts this week, especially one about how to raise a Trekkie nerd of your own. So why don't we go ahead and welcome Jason Sperber to the program. What's up, Jason?
What's up? Good to be back.
Thanks for coming back. I know that you told me in a conversation before the show started that you had a toss-up between 2 episodes as your favorite Star Trek.
My 2 favorite episodes are probably between Beyond the Farthest Star from Deep Space Nine, which is the one where Cisco thinks he's a 20th century African-American science fiction writer up against racism. And my other one is a Next Generation episode, Birthright Part 2, where Worf discovers a hidden colony of Romulans and Klingons living together, and all hell breaks loose.
I want to go ahead and introduce our next guest. She is a whiskey-loving, Star Trek-loving, horseback-riding archer actress out in Hollywood, California, doing her thing. You can find her on Twitter at GoJunko, and hopefully her computer works. So welcome to the show, Junko.
Oh, wait. I think it's working now.
There you go.
Yay.
Hey, welcome to the show.
Hey. Yep.
Thank you for being on Hard Knock Life. We haven't heard from you all week on Star Trek Week, but I wanted you on because I know you're a big fan of the show. And do you have a particular episode or series or movie or novel or comic book that you like?
Oh gosh. Well, after binging on the entire Star Trek franchise, I would have to say DS9 as far as the storytelling is by far the best. Next Generation, I'm in the middle of binge watching. Like, I've only gotten to the middle of season 2. You know, it was still dragging along like it was the original franchise. So I have a lot of mad respect to DS9 right now. Yeah.
Well, Deep Space Nine is definitely one of the Nerds of Color's most approved Star Trek franchises for sure. I don't think anyone in our collective
Yes.
dislikes that show. So
Yes.
thank you for being on the show. Look forward to talking to you.
Yeah.
Our next guest also was MIA this week on Star Trek Week, but she is also a big, huge Star Trek fan, so wanted to be on tonight. You may recognize her from her first episode talking about summer movies. She's back to talk about Star Trek. You can find her on Twitter at BlazinBitch. Welcome back, Rhee.
Hey, how's everybody going?
So you're a big Trekkie too, I guess.
Yeah, I grew up with Next Generation was the first one that I really paid attention to because it was on since I was basically born. But my favorite, I think, going with the crowd is Deep Space Nine because I think that was the first series that I actually watched from beginning to end as it aired. And
Wow.
I was like devastated by the last episode because I was like the feeling of like, oh my god, this great thing that I watched is finally ending.
Yeah.
But there's so many good Star Trek moments. Anything that has to do with the holodeck, I'm down for.
My next guest is someone that I've known for a long time. He is my brother, and he's also a writer that's based out of Washington, D.C. Welcome back to the show, Raymond.
Hi, everybody.
I know Star Trek is important to you. Angela just talked about what you leave behind, and I recall sitting in the living room watching that with you, and I'm pretty sure we went through a couple boxes of Kleenex watching that episode. But I know that's not your favorite episode.
That last scene where where the camera pulls out and then you see the station and then it disappears. That's a pretty devastating. That hurts. But no, it's not my favorite episode. My favorite episode of Star Trek of all time is actually Season 5 of The Next Generation, the second episode, Darmok, where Captain Picard ends up on a planet with another captain, and they don't know how to communicate with each other, and it's because of metaphor, and it's just a fantastic episode.
That's the Paul Winfield, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's significant. That's the first episode with the captain's jacket, right?
Yes, that is. Yes. That's exactly why it's my favorite episode. That jacket with the gray. Oh,
that was a dope jacket, and no one else ever wore one. I mean, what's up with that, right? Well, anyway, thank you everyone for being a part of the special Star Trek edition of A Hard Knock Life. We're going to get into a lot of things tonight, so I don't want to. We could sit here and reminisce about all our favorite Deep Space Nine episodes, but there's a lot of things to talk about. Specifically, I wanted to talk about a little Blu-ray that came out this week. It's called Star Trek Into Darkness. And unfortunately, Jen Fang, who wrote a full-throated defense of the movie for the Nerds of Color, is unable to join us tonight. So there is no one to take the counterpoint, because I'm pretty sure our entire panel has very strong feelings about this film. So I want to get into that. First off, if you're not familiar with Star Trek Into Darkness, it is the sequel to J.J. Abrams' reboot of the Star Trek film franchise that came out in 2009. It was one of the probably biggest hits of the summer. It came out back in May. It essentially tells a story of a mysterious Federation terrorist played by Benedict Cumberbatch who blows up a couple buildings in London and flies a big black starship that we have to catch and blows up more of London, and Kirk finds out he's Khan, doesn't know who Khan is. End of story, Kirk dies, and he's resurrected by magic triple blood. So I think I didn't leave anything else out.
You forgot the introduction of blue-eyed Klingons with lots of jewelry.
Oh, yeah. And battle helmets. And
Yeah.
I like to call them blingons.
the Blingons.
Very nice.
You can never have too many Blingons. I think, Junko, you said you were entertained by the movie. What did you find entertaining about Into Darkness?
Yes. It was everything that a Hollywood blockbuster should be. It was special effects. It was a great cast. The acting was great. The script was something that it serves a post 9/11 audience, and it did what it was supposed to do. But that's basically it. I don't think it went beyond. It didn't contribute to the franchise whatsoever.
And you know, I think in case you didn't get all the 9/11 imagery, J.J. Abrams was sure to hit it over your head with the little disclaimer at the end of the film. I think it's at the end of the film, or was it at the beginning? But he dedicates the movie to 9/11, just in case you didn't get all of the 9/11 imagery. Jason, what was your favorite? What aspect of Star Trek Into Darkness did you find the most redeeming of the film that we're about to trash relentlessly in a couple minutes?
I mean, I'm the kind of fan where if it has Star Trek in the title, I'm going to watch it. And so to revisit these characters and to see, what they're going to do with them in this alternate universe, the promise of that is always going to bring me back. And so that I was entertained, and seeing, the characters deal with the stuff that they had to deal with in this movie was, it was a fun ride, but like you, there were issues.
Yeah, and we'll get into them. I'm glad you brought up the fact that it's an alternate universe, because again, those of you who are unfamiliar with the Abrams verse, the Abrams reboot in 2009, essentially the film franchise that we're following now, the one that started with the first Star Trek and continues with Into Darkness, is an alternate timeline. Every aspect of the old Star Trek show and the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, all of that still exists, but we are now on an alternate timeline that starts way back in the 23rd century and is going to go forward. And one of my main issues with Into Darkness is the fact that, I'm one of the fans who didn't mind, rebooting vis-a-vis an alternate timeline. But one of my issues with Into Darkness is that if you're going to explore, the promise of having an alternate timeline is to explore new stories and not necessarily rehash old ones. And Jayla, do you feel like Into Darkness suffers from rehashing not only old Star Trek stories, but trying to rehash a classic Star Trek film, which would be Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan?
Well, I think there's a lot of problems with a reboot of Star Trek, especially the older films, because we're just not in that time set. It's very hard to have the same outlook at that story, and even Star Trek itself, the way they had the outlook in the 60s and in the earlier films. So for me, looking back, if you compare it to the original movie, the story just won't mean the same when we're making it now.
Mm-hmm.
And I also felt that it was an okay cast, but they didn't have the same cohesion and charm as the original cast, because I don't know about anybody else, but after I think about 45 minutes, I was kind of like, I don't want to see Kirk. His face is starting to annoy me. Just his smug. It was just really good. But
His smug mug.
yes, get a smug mug.
Smug mug Kirk. Well, I mean, Kirk's supposed to be smug, though, right? Isn't that?
He's supposed to be smug, but I kind of felt like he was being a caricature of Kirk, not an actor who is Kirk.
Right.
No,
I get that.
Felt like he was doing the Saturday Night Live version of Captain Kirk.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting take, because I feel like of all of the rebooted casts, Chris Pine, I feel like is the one that's the least like Will Shatner. You can tell Carl Urban is channeling DeForest Kelley, and you clearly see Zach Quinto channeling Leonard Nimoy. I mean, whereas with Chris Pine, I feel like he kind of is playing Chris Pine playing Kirk, and not really he'll have a couple Kirk-esque or Shatner-esque inflections, but I don't know. He's the one to me that's the most removed from the original cast member, and also John Cho. I love John, but I don't know. There's something about him that does not scream.
I also feel like all the other cast members are just not utilized enough. Like,
Right. I mean, I think I'm going to bring you in a little bit on this, Raymond, because I think part of that is the fact that the old cast had not only 6 movies but 3 seasons of development to kind of become a family.
Yeah, and also I think that when we look back on it, because we've known them over 3 series, yeah, we know these characters, but is there really an arc for Uhura or Chekhov or Scotty in the television series? Not really. I mean, they're serviceable stereotypes a lot of times, but there's they come in and they do their business. But it's the show, the television show was clearly focused, I think, on Spock and Kirk and to a lesser degree McCoy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and so
yeah.
the other aspect of Into Darkness that I think speaks to this, the notion that this isn't a film that has all of that history to rely on, because it's a reboot, because it's supposed to take place earlier in the lives of all the characters we know and love. It doesn't have the benefit of that. That said, I feel like one of the weakest aspects of Into Darkness was the whole Khan reveal, especially because the writers and the producers had been coy about whether or not Benedict Cumberbatch was playing Khan to begin with. Shawn, I know that you're not a big fan of Benedict Cumberbatch. Please, everyone, tweet at RealLovePunk for all of your Cumberbatchian love.
No.
The whole notion of Benedict Cumberbatch even being in the film and playing Khan, especially, I think, kind of rubs you the wrong way a little bit, doesn't it?
I mean, I just think he's just he's just great in Sherlock, like I said earlier. He's just overrated to the point where now he's Smog, and now he's pretty soon he's gonna be, I don't know, Storm in the X-Men. Who knows? I mean, but this guy is everywhere, and he's a serviceable enough actor. But I mean, I look at him. There was absolutely zero menace in him. I was like, I don't care how genetically enhanced you are, I would whoop Khan's ass in this film, because this guy there was zero menace. It was like, if you could kick somebody's ass with perfect diction, absolutely, go ahead. He would have been like the Scrabble Kung Fu champion of the world. But there was no menace to him. There was just nothing. There was no gravity. Fine, he can shed a tear. Ooh, how amazing is that on film? But it was just an absence of menace and an absence.
I think you're saying
death.
he was too young.
No, I think he was too much of a punk. Like, if Khan is supposed to be this like pretty old like warrior guy. The guy was just like, it's like, how did an Abercrombie and Fitch model become a genetic warrior? It was just like, is this like a really bad, like crappy Star Wars Clone Wars script that JJ had in his basement, decided to make? I mean, it was just, I hate this movie.
Well, well, I mean, everyone pretty much knows that Star Trek 2009 and Star Trek Into Darkness were J.J. Abrams, show reels for George Lucas and Disney to take over Star Wars, which is why he turns his back on Star Trek and is now doing Star Trek Episode 7. I mean, it was,
why San Francisco looked like Coruscant, It's like, wow. I was expecting R2 to come out, Then you had the whole Simon Pegg and his little R2D to C-3PO parallel. This movie sucks so badly. God, I get mad.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're here. That's what the Hard Knock Life is about, is to make us mad and foam at the mouth over the movies that we love to hate and hate to love. Well, and then the other aspect, which goes back to what we were talking about as far as like the development of these characters. I mean, the thing about Khan, the thing that kind of like rang false for me is the whole, like I said, the reveal. The camera zooms in on his face and he says, "I am Khan." And the best part is that like Spock and Kirk are like, who? Because there's absolutely no history there. I mean, the writers are relying solely on what the fans already know and expect. And again, this brings me back to the whole like being coy about it that I find kind of annoying. Junko, like, if they knew he was playing Khan and we knew he was playing Khan, what's the point of saying he's not playing Khan?
I think it was to starve off protests.
Because people knew that they weren't going to like him in the role? That people...
Well, because you have the race bending aspect of it, even though that character itself was originally a race bend in and of itself. But the fact that you have the pastiest of Caucasians playing Khan rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, myself included, especially because they found the one white guy that looks like an otter to be Khan.
Again, all of you Cumberbitches out there, direct your tweets at
Bring
Blasian.
it. Bring it. But I agree with Shawn. He was an incredibly weak Khan. He doesn't look like he is the result of the best of genetics. And also, I think the point of having a man of color be Khan in the original was kind of a smack to the face to white supremacy. I do think that was something that was done purposefully. So it's like they kind of missed that by making, a white British sounding man the pinnacle of humanity.
Well, that brings up some interesting points, though, especially in light of the fact that Abrams and company, Lindelof and Orsi and everybody were clearly trying to go for a 9/11 terrorism angle here. I think one of the commenters on the Nerds of Color brought up the fact that if, say, they had cast, say, a South Asian or Middle Eastern actor in the role of Khan, essentially playing this Bin Laden-esque role, that in itself would be problematic. What say you, Jason? Do you think that was part of Abrams' thinking when casting, like Angela and Shawn pointed out, the whitest, Englishest person in the world to play Khan Noonien Singh?
I don't think that crossed their mind, because, I mean, the rumors of casting beforehand were about Benicio del Toro, right? And, I mean, I don't remember if those were, those panned out as true or not, but the rumor was that he passed on it, and then they offered it to Cumberbatch, and so, I don't if they were going that route, I don't think that it was about necessarily, avoiding, Arab terrorists image at all.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that brings me to like my next point about like what I found ridiculous about when at the end of the film. Two things I found ridiculous, but four things. Well, there's too many things, but some of the things that were pretty annoying at the end of the film was, one, if the USS Vengeance is like going full speed into the Earth from wherever the hell it was, I think it would do more than knock over a couple of buildings in San Francisco. I think it should have like laid waste to the planet, number one. But they couldn't do that because they had to set up this whole silly chase through the skies of San Francisco where Spock could have his vengeance for Kirk dying, and then Kirk's whole triple blood resurrection. There's a lot of things that I find problematic and problematic's not even the right word.
Yeah, I think you're losing your thread.
I'm like Shawn. I think I'm supposed to be moderating this, but I'm feeling the rage coming. So I'll probably stop there. But it does bring me to an interesting point, the whole notion of how Star Trek, successfully or not, in the past and in the present, has used, its alien races, its storytelling as racial allegory. Raymond, you've been writing several posts all week about how racists have been portrayed vis-a-vis characters like Lieutenant Stiles, Miles O'Brien, and then the bombshell today of Captain Kirk being the ultimate racist in Star Trek mythology.
Well, okay. let me clarify.
You notice Raymond doesn't have his Twitter handle up there.
Yeah, and let me clarify. It's not that he's the ultimate racist. It's just that he's a little racist. He's a little racist, and that's an important point in humanizing him, and how, since we're talking about them as these alien cultures as analogies, well, if the Cardassians and the Rymans are analogies for Germans, then who is the Federation an analogy for? America. And so that's the biggest analogy, and that's the one that deserves the most critique and analysis. So it's what is the Federation saying about being American? And I'm saying, so we're a little racist, not the ultimate racist.
Right. Well, yes. But Star Trek has had a history of trying to tell racial stories using its alien characters. I know, Jason, this is a big part of your scholarly history with Star Trek.
Yeah.
How has Star Trek successfully navigated that intersection.
Well, the legend about Star Trek has always been that Roddenberry's vision was to tell contemporary issue stories, but do it using science fictional allegory so that the censors at the network wouldn't freak out. And so everyone always points to episodes from the original series like Let This Be Your Last Battlefield was racism. But the utopian vision of the United Federation of Planets was such that in this future, Roddenberry decreed that humanity was united and humanity did not have any of these problems anymore. We had evolved. There was no racism, no classism, no sexism, but the thing is, these shows are being created in, contemporary United States, and so you still have that context of when and where these ideas of this utopian future are being created, and so you have that paradox going on, because so you want to show that you have this diverse cast, and yes, it was groundbreaking to have these characters of color and women who were officers working together on this bridge. Yes, and yeah, there's no denying it was groundbreaking, but you still had the white male heterosexual captain, and that went through the first spin-off, and so you can't really divorce these ideas of this perfect future from the fact that we're making up these ideas now, and our own prejudices are still in the creation of these things. And so the problem is when you try to put these stories in science fictional clothing and say, we're going to talk about race and racism, but we're only going to use aliens. And so, yes, you can tell stories that you can't tell other ways, like, in Voyager. I just watched it again today just to remind myself how cheesy it was, but, the episode Faces, where poor, intergalactic tragic Mulata B'Elanna Torres gets split into one human and one Klingon, and they have to face each other and realize that they need each other to survive. You couldn't have that story in a non-science fictional milieu, but at the same time, what are you saying about race and racism? You're saying that certain traits are biologically heritable, that culture and biology are the same. All these things that we've been fighting against for so long.
Well, and that's the ultimate kind of issue about using alien races as a proxy for the different races on Earth. That, like you said, it kind of associates race and biology rather than race in society, or race as a social construct. Junko, I know that you probably have Star Trek freshest in your mind than most of us, because I know that you've been binge watching, marathoning every single series of Star Trek. What have you noticed about? I think you just went through Deep Space Nine and a little bit of Next Generation. What have you noticed about how successfully or unsuccessfully Star Trek talks about this?
I mean, I would add to Jason that it definitely kind of mushed together ethnicity and culture, but I think I'm not half Japanese, half whatever, but I think it actually, on the good side of that episode, it actually spoke to a lot of people who are Hapa or just split heritage. And I met a girl the other day who had never, she's Mexican and Japanese, she had never explored her Japanese side, she was always very Mexican, and she was just starting to, at the age of, 20 or something like that, exploring that side. So I think Worf is bicultural, ethnically Klingon, but bicultural. B'Elanna's is definitely half. So I think, they didn't get it completely right, but in some respects, I think B'Elanna's, that was a pretty, recurring theme. I kind of got sick of it because it was just like, you were just like, shut up after a while. Like, stop moaning about it. You have a kid.
No, but it's like, you have to have Worf, who Michael Dorn's an African-American actor. Then you have, and it has to be, it made it doubly more annoying because it has to be actor of color playing this conflicted person. You didn't see, like, it wouldn't, I would love to have seen, a white actor who was half whatever and being conflicted in these things. But when you have DS9 followed by Voyager, you have the same type of thing, and then you have Tuvok, who was like the worst Vulcan in the history of Vulcan lore ever, always complaining about his identity or something's happening somehow. He should have just stayed Maquis and killed people. I would have liked him a lot better than trying to go backwards. But I think that because what happened, it's kind of the same problem that I have with the new reboots. Is that, like, later, as far as I got down the line, like, anything that's remotely political, it's like off the top rope elbow smash, like a Spike Lee film. I just want to make sure that this, goddammit, no matter what. You will know about race. You will know about post 9/11 allegory. You will. And there's absolutely zero space or room for the audience to actually even, like, mull it over. You have no chance to even juggle it or take it apart or unpack it because we're being shoved in the teeth and the gut with it the entire time. So there's zero subtlety. And Star Trek is best when there's a little bit over the top, but like this whole idea of like the space mulatto and the transracial adoptee and all, it's like a rampant NPR episode of some type of show on NPR, and it gets really annoying.
Well, and Jayla, you mentioned that Deep Space Nine is your favorite of the Star Trek series, and if I'm interpreting Shawn correctly, Deep Space Nine, like they stopped being allegory. Like what the whole Sisko trilogy has been about is the fact that like Captain Sisko has, race is no longer allegory with Captain Sisko. He wears his race on his sleeve, and more than that, like the issues that they deal with in Deep Space Nine from like just war and fighting a war and
occupations,
occupation, religious genocide. All these things are topics that they talk about.
Also, it was great with Deep Space Nine. For me, it was the first time that I ever questioned the Federation in and of itself. Because if you watch all the earlier Star Treks, there's no questioning that Federation were there and were doing the right thing. At Deep Space Nine was the first time I was kind of like, the way the Federation acts, they're kind of like a really nice Borg.
The Rubik's analogy.
It's like, we're gonna make contact with you. We're not gonna mess with you until we want to, and then you have to be like us because we know how to live, and you're gonna join this Federation of planets,
right.
And then we tell you what to do.
Like an elite nightclub.
Yes, exactly.
Like, you, not you. You, come on in.
Well, I want to bring Junko in and then Raymond. Go ahead, Junko.
Yeah, you can't forget season 1 in Next Generation. There was that one episode, 1 or 2. I think it was almost like a hint, and then there was a solid episode where all the higher ups get
conspiracy.
Get that little bug that looked like. Yes. So. That is a type, I think, is representative of a type of, like, brainwashing that occurred high up above, and, all that scary stuff happened. So it's like, and then I think early on, you're like, oh, you can actually infiltrate, the Federation planets pretty easily with a little bug.
Well, and Raymond, and you were saying something when Angela was talking, and I know personally how you feel about Deep Space Nine and Next Generation, and how the 24th century Star Trek tackles issues different from the 23rd century Star Trek. But what is your opinion about like this notion that later Trek series are less subtle than the original?
I think I don't know. It's pretty. The allegory. It's a science fiction allegory, but it's not very subtle in Let That Be Your Last Battlefield when the dude is half white and half black. That's
when the Riddler is wearing half
when the Riddler that's pretty unsubtle.
Yeah.
But I think actually I actually would say it's the reverse. The problem, or the thing that's interesting about the later series is that they have these problems and there isn't a clear line right away of what's the obvious answer. I mean, that's why In the Pale Moonlight is such a big episode in the Deep Space Nine, because in that one where he has to wrestle with a decision and he chooses something that may not be morally right but is ethically, I mean, it's ethically murky, but he does it, and he's our guy. He's the guy that we were supporting the whole time, and that
becomes an anti-hero almost.
Right, and that's the big difference as it progresses, is that the problems get harder to solve as they go on. So you have the admirals being kind of vengeful. So Sean's favorite episode is the Drumhead, and that episode is an episode about the Federation going a step too far.
I mean, it's funny because it's like the Drumhead, for me, is almost like the entree into DS9. Because when you start seeing the underbelly of the Federation, the Utopia is tarnished now. And, I mean, and you look at, like, Utopia has its costs. Utopia, there's many steps you have to take to make a utopian society. And so I think that, like, all the veneer of the Federation, the shine, the luster, it's weird because I think in these circular terms, and it also kind of reminds me when, in a DS9 episode, when Quark and Garrett are talking about the Federation and they're drinking root beer. It's so cloying and bubbly. Wave the Warrior. Part 1, I think it was, right?
Yeah.
And that all comes together because there's something about that episode where it was just like, you know what? We didn't see all of what it took to actually make the Federation. We saw Cochrane, we saw Vulcan's land in Colorado, we never saw like what it took to actually make the Federation. And so that was a kind of a window into like the Federation is probably a pretty vile empire.
But I mean, going back to like Deep Space Nine and how Deep Space Nine seems to be a touchstone series for everyone on the panel and most of the people who have been writing on Nerds of Color all week. And I think, one of those reasons is obvious. It's the only, thus far, Star Trek series to feature a man of color in the lead role, and and after 4 seasons as a captain, the first black captain to lead a show. And how important. I mean,
He's still got to start out as a commander.
Yeah, well, that's what right, exactly. I mean, I think that was a big thing in 1993. Like, he's the lead of the show, but why is he not a captain?
Oh, I remember my grandfather like, what? Like, it's the worst thing. I think also, I mean, here's an apocryphal story. I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard it from a source who wrote the novelization of Far Beyond the Stars. That the reason that Avery Brooks was kind of like basically blacklisted after DS9, didn't see that often, because they wanted him to die at the end of Deep Space Nine, and he refused to do it. Mm-hmm. And he was like, I did this many seasons of becoming this powerful black man for people to watch and attach to science fiction, and you want me to die? Why would that?
Well, I know that Avery Brooks, and I think he's made his peace with it now, but I think at the time, too, he wasn't happy about becoming a prophet either. I mean, I think his main issue with, he ascends to godhood, but his main issue with that is that he's a black man who leaves his son behind.
And it becomes a magical Negro. He might as well be John Coffey from the Green Mile.
Yeah, he literally becomes a magic Negro at the end too. I mean, so.
Are we really gonna call Captain Sisko a magical Negro?
Yes.
Are we really doing that right now?
Yes.
Well, he does ascend to the...
If they ever do a sequel to Deep Space Nine, he's just gonna. Okay.
It's going to be him, John Coffey, and the Oracle from the Matrix. They're going to have a movie together.
But Raymond, you remember, I mean, at the time, Avery Brooks, he didn't do Star Trek conventions post-1998 because I think he had issues with the way he went out on What You Leave Behind. I mean, you were aware of that.
I mean, that's true that, that's been reported that, like, he was very concerned about the idea of abandoning the sun, so that's why they add the scene where he says, I'll be back, maybe tomorrow, maybe yesterday. But at the same time, I think that he has the most clearly defined arc out of any of the captains. I mean, he's certainly not the same man from Emissary What You Leave Behind. Yeah.
Well, but is that how much of that is the nature of Deep Space Nine versus the other series? I mean, the other series, the characters aren't allowed to have arcs because they're episodic shows where they're constantly, encountering strange new worlds and strange civilizations, right? Jason, I mean, the thing about Deep Space Nine that I think resonates with most of us is that it's the only Star Trek series that tells a complete story.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's why the character. I mean, and I think that was the appeal for the. I mean, because there are a lot of Trekkies who don't necessarily like Deep Space Nine because of this, because it is this kind of self-contained storytelling. I mean, it's the only Star Trek that was like serialized, where like the episodes, especially in the later seasons, the episodes,
there's arc after arc after arc.
Right. It was. I mean, there was nothing episodic about Deep Space Nine. So, Jason, can you talk a little bit about just that storytelling aspect? Raymond said that Captain Sisko has the greatest arc of any Star Trek captain, precisely because the storytelling is so different in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing that struck me the most was that basically you have this premiere that was like, 90 minutes of content, right, with a two-parter together. And there was like a full 30 minutes where it was just Sisko giving a philosophy lesson. I mean, like, I was just astounded, like, you can't do that anymore. Like people would just change the channel. But it was him giving a philosophy lesson to the prophets. And I think that sort of set the tone when you're talking about the storytelling arc, is that since it started in this whole idea of, linear life, and there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end, and we have to move through, and we build on our experiences. And so that sort of, I mean, whether they intended it or not, I mean, they probably at that point didn't, but that sort of is reflected in the way that the series was, a one whole story.
Mm-hmm. Well, because I mean, in the earlier, I know Raymond has made the point, and offline, that even in the earlier seasons there are seeds of what eventually happens in the later seasons. But I mean, the first 2 to 3 seasons of Deep Space Nine were pretty episodic. I mean, they kind of followed the format of the Next Generation, in that each episode was self-contained and not necessarily relating to the other. And Jayla, with Deep Space Nine, I mean, do you think we'll ever have another Star Trek series, one that could feature a black captain again? I mean, or has kind of, has Captain Sisko broken the mold?
But, I don't think where they're going with Star Trek, if Into the Darkness and, the reboot is what we could judge, because I kind of think those are kind of regressive. Like, with their treatment of, like, women, where, we have almost every major female character. Actually, no, every major female character, you get to see her in her underwear. It usually not of her own choice. That was one of the big turnoffs for me. But I really kind of feel like Star Trek is going into this, like, almost dude bro. And whenever I talk to dude bros about, well, as dude bro-ish as people who want to sit around talking about Star Trek get, they always talk about Sisko as, oh, he's the angry black man. And, like, when they rank captains, it's like Janeway and Sisko aren't even mentioned. Like, they're not even captains that you get to compare, which always blows my mind. So I kind of think that the fandom has regressed to the point where I don't have hope for it. I really don't. I would love to, because I think, Sisko for me, I think is why I didn't let anybody growing up give me crap about what I could do or what my abilities are, because I knew as a little 9-year-old girl that one day I was going to be the commander of a Deep Space Nine vessel, and I was going to save the universe. So I would love for other children of color to have that. I think I just grew up in this golden era where, I got to see a reflection of me. Because the thing that I love about Sisko was he doesn't follow that sci-fi rule where you could have black faces but not black culture.
Right, which is kind of the thesis of Jenn and James's posts on Star Trek Week this week.
Yeah, he brought black culture, and as much as I think that's great, and a lot of people of color think that's great, the dudebros were very threatened by it. So they'd rather see Kirk hump a green woman in her underwear, who then dies, and we don't even think about that.
Right. Well, Junko, I know that you've recently watched the Captain's documentary, as well as all of the mini focus episodes of with each Captain actor. Can you talk a little bit about your impressions of the? It's probably my favorite documentary of all time, of the Kirk, the Shatner Avery Brooks Captain's focus documentary, and what, seeing Avery in his kind of like natural habitat, and how his personality kind of infused who Captain Sisko ended up being.
In the documentary, Avery Brooks is so musically inclined. I know a lot of eclectic people, and he is just that 150% artist. So I think he's never been at the conventions because he's an artist, and he just doesn't have that mindset. He'd rather just be stuck at his computer, or not computer, at his piano, or teaching classes. And I'm not sure. I almost don't feel like I don't think he has a sense like Patrick Stewart or William Shatner or any other guys to serve their audience. I think that Avery Brooks is just, I'm going to continue doing my own thing, and that's kind of it. So
Right.
yeah, because even Kate Mulgrew was saying that it was really rare for William Shatner to be able to get a hold of Avery Brooks to do the documentary. So I think he's just an eclectic guy.
Well, and he teaches down the street, or not down the street, but very, very near where you are in jail. He's actually a professor at Rutgers.
Yes, at Rutgers, my alma
Princeton,
mater.
yeah. Princeton.
And I got to meet him at the open house, and I had a moment. It was a silent moment where I tried not to cause attention to myself, but I was just like, Captain Sisko. But I didn't want to call him Captain Sisko, so he probably just walked past me like, there's a woman having a moment. We're just going to ignore her. But yeah, that was, whenever there were freshman orientations, I went to the Newark campus, which is even the campus that he went to, but I would tell everybody, it's like, do you know who teaches at this school? Captain Benjamin Sisko. So you'd be proud.
Yep.
So, Raymond, you and I have had conversations in the past about how much Avery Brooks, if they had not cast Avery Brooks in 1992, that the Captain Sisko that we were all talking about may not have existed. How much, when we've heard Avery Brooks speak about this, because we were lucky enough to go to a Star Trek convention with Avery Brooks, that his sense of history, his sense of culture informs his performance of Captain Sisko. And I think episodes like Far Beyond the Stars or Bada Bing Bada Bang, if that was not Avery Brooks, those character ticks may or may not have ever evolved.
But we haven't had those stories.
Right.
Yeah, especially, that's 6 years. That's 6 years after he's been with the character. So, I think any actor, if you're with a character for that period of time, you have to imbue your personality into it. It's just going to leak in. And Avery Brooks, and everything else I've ever seen Avery Brooks in, he is him. He is himself in everything, which is a character trait that Shatner shares. I think that you have to kind of have that personality that is in and of itself kind of like a captain.
You always joke that I didn't really come to Deep Space Nine until Sisko turned into Hawk.
Yeah, right. Until he shaved his hair and grew the beard.
Yeah. Because I was one of those I was one of those fair weather fans who waited for Worf to show up before I really got into Deep Space Nine. So with the once Brooks shaved the head and grew the goatee and became Hawk in space, that's when I was sold. Well, and speaking of how actors infuse the roles, a joke you and I made I think just last night is the fact that Jean-Luc Picard was written to be a Frenchman, and in that first season of Star Trek that Junko you just finished watching, I mean, he's this proud Frenchman, and then somewhere in season 2 or 3, I mean, Jean-Luc Picard becomes British. Like, he starts drinking Earl Grey, he's reading Shakespeare, he's like the most British French dude ever, right? And that's because you cast Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard.
There's so many things when they were casting Patrick Stewart. He was bald, he was older, he was not dashing, and he's British. So there's so many things that were going against him, but, you know, he was the right person for the part, so they kind of recessed the French over time.
Raymond's right in the sense that Avery Brooks, or any actor who imbues a role has to infuse his own personal life stories into it. But I think someone like an Avery Brooks who has a sense of history, who's able to kind of bring that to the role. I know that Shawn, you in your whole post on the site this week was about how powerful that was to see, a black man in that capacity, and not just that, but a black man who is proud of being a black man as well. We're not in a post-racial world with Captain Sisko.
No,
right?
Not at all. And I think him saying Yoruba mask in an episode was like, well, him having the African art and fabrics in the background from, a lot of Western and Southern African tribes in his office. I mean, that was something you don't see today.
Mm.
I mean, I think, Deep Space Nine was the last of the almost pro-positive black men on television, because at one time you had Rock, Frank's Place, In Living Color, I mean, all at the same time. And so you had a three-dimensional idea of blackness. You don't get that at all anymore. I think Sisko was probably one of the last three-dimensional black characters on television that actually got to be grounded in race without it being the definition of who he was.
Right.
Somebody mentioned earlier that Star Trek, the new ones, are pretty regressive. And I think that what it has done is, because Star Trek, the reason I loved it so much is because it was such an aspirational framework. Any walk of life, whether you were disabled, from Geordie representing that, whoever you were, there was something you could hang on to culturally and kind of see it as an aspirational arc to be a part of the Star Trek universe. Whereas now, it's, battle. It's like
it's an action movie.
Yeah, it actually betrayed its own mythology to a point where I find it's almost unwatchable now.
I think part of that is also, this is 50 years later, and this is, I don't know, 400 hours of television, and, with Nemesis, it feels like 600 hours of film. Like, it just feels like there's just been a lot out there. And, I think Star Trek is kind of special in that way, that it's one of the few franchises that it's kind of starting to crumble under its own weight. Because, I mean, I think that's my biggest criticism for Star Trek Into Darkness is, it's not fan service at this point, it's fan exploitation. Why is it Khan? Because you know who Khan is, and you're gonna be all excited that
and you're gonna pay for it.
Yeah, and you'll pay for Khan.
Exactly. In blood and treasure.
So it's because it's Star Trek has become kind of scared of trying new things, because if it does something new, then what's the point of doing it as the franchise brand? Why risk that? Why risk the moneymaker that is, look, it's pointy ears and punching?
Yeah.
Well, they have been shopping around a TV show that's supposed to be Starfleet Academy, which would be for younger viewers. So they basically want to have Gossip Girl, but in Starfleet Academy, and that sickens me.
It's just sad that Star Trek franchise, creators, whether it be J.J. Abrams, whoever, that they're being so conservative when the motto, is to seek out, new lives and new civilization, to boldly go where no man has gone before, which was my big stickler with Into Darkness. But it is sad that, everyone's a little bit scared, but yet there's this big motto, that is forever glued to the franchise, and it is the franchise. So
I think that's also the thing about, because right now Star Trek solely exists as a movie franchise, and because, like what Raymond said about how prior to 2009 you had, like 400 to 500 hours of canon and continuity and storytelling and development. And now, we're only 2 movies in 4 years, we're only 4 hours into this particular universe. That I think, Shawn, is a point you made in your post about what your grandfather said, that Star Trek shouldn't exist on the screen. It should exist on the television, because existing on the television allows you to develop over time. Like the reason Captain Sisko becomes, this different person in 1998 than he was in 1993 is because he had 7 years to do that. Same thing with the family aspect of the Next Generation crew and all of that, and even
we grew along with them. Because if you just put out a movie every couple of whatever, there's no growth. There's just only new audiences. And so you're not having a continuity at all. So I think you watch something over time, it's like, oh, okay, I grew up. I mean, I'm just thinking how much of my life has been spent with the Star Trek characters. It's unbelievable. Like, I probably spent more time in Star Trek than I have with my friends. If you think about it, between the books, and the cartoons, and the episodes, it's phenomenal how much time I've spent with Star Trek.
What I think is interesting is, we're all here as fans, and, we all have so much invested in this property. We have to remember, that really modern pop culture fandom and fan culture comes from Star Trek, and comes from, the fan attempts to save the original series multiple times, the fan attempts to keep the series going after cancellation through conventions, through fan clubs, and so I think at this point we're at the point where, just like before, where it's up to the fans to keep the story and the culture going. Whether or not it's official doesn't matter.
I'm gonna leave that as the last word. Jason's eloquent wrap up to our Star Trek blowout tonight. The idea of Star Trek being the font for all that is fandom, I think, is very interesting, because you're right in terms of conventioning and just all-encompassing fandom for a particular property, I think does kind of originate with Star Trek. So I want to thank Jason. Find him on Twitter at dad_strangeland. Thank you to Junko. You can find her as well on Twitter at GoJunko. And JLo, thank you again for joining us for Hard Knock Life. You can find her at Blasian Bitch. And Shawn Taylor is at Real Love Punk. Thank you for joining the show. And Raymond used to be on Twitter, but he's not anymore. So don't follow Raymond, because you can't. And I want to give a special thank you to every one of you who's watching Hard Knock Life, and every one of you who read our posts throughout Star Trek Week. Thank you for making Star Trek Week the best experience I've had. It's been a blast being a part of this, so thank you, and I'll see you next time.
Well, it's the N.O.C. in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV, yeah. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the Hard Knock Life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share the interest together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments, and the lectures. Fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the N.O.C. in full color, you see me? The Hard